Hello and welcome to It's Your Time You're Wasting. And I hope you're all ready to listen to another wonderful, wonderful show from us two. And
You're
we'll
making it
be,
sound like hard work, Martin.
hey, we'll
Come on,
be,
be
we'll,
joyful.
joyful. We'll be on, of course, YouTube if you're watching us, and on various other podcasts with sound only, such as Amazon and Podbean, I think it's called, and there's also
I
I
don't
don't
know.
know
Look,
Apple.
who cares? Who
Most
cares?
of our listeners apparently
Listen to
listen
it.
to us through Apple.
Do they?
Yeah, so
Good.
that's good. So follow us on those various things, and also like us and subscribe to us on YouTube or wherever else you can. But please
Exactly. Yeah.
like as well. That's really important.
We had a lovely piece of feedback from last week's show where one listener said I was surprisingly nuanced.
You were, yes, you were.
Yeah. I mean, they agreed with you, obviously, Martin, because
Yeah,
you're the voice of reason. But
of
yeah,
course.
I surprised them with my nuance.
Yeah. Do you do nuance?
Not knowingly.
No,
Never knowingly nuanced. That's me.
just oldance,
Yeah, exactly.
whatever that is. Oh,
Yes.
nuance. Oh, nuance. Is it French nuance, by the way?
Oh, Marie.
Is it because of the French? Are they noticeably nuanced?
Well, I mean,
It's obviously before we were Anglo-Saxons. We weren't at all new. Anyway, that's absolute nonsense.
anyway,
We're going to
this
talk
week,
about
Martin,
coaching.
coaching or Ker-CHING.
Coaching.
We're quite pleased with the title.
You're very pleased with that. I think you have to take responsibility for it.
I just wanted to share some of
No,
no, okay, the blame. So Martin, a lot of coaching going on. Is it living up to the hype?
this is what we want to talk about today, and hopefully we'll get to the bottom of it somewhere along the line. Um, there seems to be a lot of people talking about it in education. I think since the 1990s, but I think it goes back further as a idea, as a way of educating. Right back, could we go back to Socrates? In fact,
Hard to get you off Socrates sometimes, isn't it?
well, it's good to be able to go back to the ancient Greeks every now and then, because they started everything.
Yes, they did.
It's
Tell us
it's
about Socrates
it's
and the
their fault.
Socratic method.
No, but this is it. The Socratic method was when Socrates used to approach people in the market or other places and annoy them incredibly by asking them
Importune them.
questions, asking them questions about things, about the meaning of life and various other things, to the point where everyone came out of it completely ignorant and realizing they didn't know what they thought they knew.
Yeah, they
The Socratic
executed him
method.
for it, didn't they? Sort of. What was he? Something doing something dubious to the youth,
No, he wasn't doing. He was corrupting the youth. Apparently, that's
corrupting,
that's part of
corrupting.
how
Yeah,
he got put to death in the end, or given the
given
hemlock
him.
cup.
Yeah,
Um, so perhaps the first coach didn't, if we can call it coaching. Perhaps there are certain things about it that we can draw from that,
yeah.
aha, which is a bit
True.
like coaching in
Well,
other ways.
so yeah, the obviously like many words, metaphorical in roots. It comes from coaches driven by horses, and apparently, Martin, I found this out doing a bit of research in the 1830s. The word coach was used at Oxford University, to refer to the tutor who carried a student through their exam.
Yeah, and
Right.
and interesting that it has the exam focus even then,
Yeah,
because
right. Yeah,
there's something that is tangible at the end of it in those cases, that they come through the exam and hopefully do well because they've had a coach take them through. I wonder if it was ex-students or
I don't know.
yeah, I
Maybe.
wonder who did it. It would have to be
Well,
people who knew.
yeah. Well, let's park that, and maybe we can explore it in our free time. Maybe we can get a coach to help us through it. So later on in the 19th century, American universities started coaching sports teams,
Yeah,
and that's where the whole coaching industry, I think, really gets its grip on things through sports.
Yeah.
And it's only later that it moves to spheres like business.
Business coaching, very big in the 80s, I seem to remember. I don't know if it was before, but
Yeah.
very big in the 80s, and onwards. And I think it hit education, certainly in this country, in the 1990s, though was talked about in the 80s as well. But I think it got bigger in the 90s to the present day, no less, where I think it's a sort of resurgent interest
Very
in it
much
at the
so.
moment.
Yeah, very much so. And I think the obviously the sports coaching model very different to a lot of what goes on in education, which is sort of filtered through the humanistic psychology of people like Carl Rogers, who's well known for his client centered therapy. And that kind of approach that values empathy and listening and self directed growth is much, much more a feature of what we mainly think of as coaching in the educational world.
Right. In terms of, can we look at how education coaching works in comparison to something like sports coaching? Because I think there are important differences with that.
Yeah, I think
Um,
you're right.
and one of the which, I mean, it's perhaps a power dynamic. I mean, certainly if we look at tennis, there's Djokovic, who famously this very week, I think, or at the beginning of the week, sacked his sports coach, or they amicably split, shall we say. And his sports coach was Andy Murray, who beat him once in a Wimbledon final, no less. But just before the French Open, so it's an interesting time to do it. I think Emma Raducanu is someone who's famously gets rid of coaches just before she takes part in something as well. But yeah, is this what a coach who comes into a classroom doesn't tend to have the teacher be able to say, "Oh, I don't want you to come in and coach me." It tends to be slightly different power dynamic.
Yeah, maybe. Although I think a lot of the research into instructional coaching is really clear that it shouldn't be prescriptive, that people should want it and sign up to it. So to that extent, maybe there are similarities. But and when you think, sports coaching, obviously tennis stars like Djokovic and Raducanu, there is a very different power dynamic. But we've also had over the years lots of stories of slightly abusive relationships between sports coaches and younger coachees. We even had sort of not that long ago the Spanish women's football team coach getting into quite a lot of trouble.
Right. I mean, I don't know if that is that the you're not talking about the kiss, are you? On
The
the
Kiss,
that was I
absolutely.
don't know if he was a coach, but anyway, he was.
He was a coach, yeah.
Was he their coach? I don't know. All right, we're gonna have to look that up now.
Who do you think he was? Just some random.
No, no, he wasn't. I don't think he was the coach of the team, but
Oh, really? Oh,
no, I don't think so.
well,
But
all right.
I think he
I'll
was.
defer to your
I
football
think he
knowledge.
was a bureaucrat. But
I'm out of,
I
I'm
can't.
out of my depth.
You've thrown me now.
I know.
But
Sorry.
certainly, there's certainly been a sort of abusive relationships between coaches and their proteges at points. Certainly in the gymnastics
Yeah.
world and
Yeah.
other places.
And
But I mean
so
that's not
sports
to say
coaches.
it's coaching is a bad thing. I mean these things happen
No.
in all sorts of walks of life, unfortunately.
Yes, no. I think that what I was trying to get at there is that the power dynamic in sports coaching can be very much in the hands of the coach,
Yeah,
depending on the sort of the experience and the success of the people they're coaching, I suppose.
yeah, and it's interesting that also it is sometimes used by management in a situation to get an employee to do their job better. We'll bring
Or
somebody
yeah,
in to help you, to coach you through what you're doing, to make you a better person, teacher,
yeah. Well,
whatever it happens to be.
that's sometimes the intention. I remember, oh, a long time ago now, sort of working at a school where the head teacher made it really clear that my role was to coach people out of the job so that he
Mm.
could get rid of them. And so I'd have I'd have a group of teachers I was coaching, and I'd have a weekly meeting with the head teacher, and he'd say, "How are they doing?" And I'd go, "Really well. They really responded." And he's not what I want to hear.
No, so that's the opposite of life coaching, trying to make people better and better at things, you're trying to make someone worse.
If, I mean, yeah, not great. Not something I enjoyed.
No, that's it's a very peculiar thing.
Yeah.
Um, the life coaching as well is another thing that people have, which is this sort of
Have you had
improvement
that?
idea. It's a sort of comes from the self-help movement, you know. So
Mm.
with these self-help books and self-help coaching and things like that, is there any sort of cross fertilization from that and business coaching into teaching and coaching in education, do you think?
Well, maybe. Yeah, I think it. It does. It definitely stems back to that Carl Rogers stuff that I was talking about. I think one of the distinctions that occurs to me, Martin, is that when you're coaching somebody in sports or in some other performance field, like maybe music, it's very immediate, and the coach can make a suggestion. It can be acted upon and then reacted to. Whereas coaching in business or education or life, it's maybe harder to see the effects of coaching.
Yeah, I think if you can imagine, I mean, Andy Murray being Djokovic's coach, he would watch him in practice, he would watch him doing the games, and then talk to him about what he saw, what he's observing over that period of time, and then work on it, you know, and in a
Yeah.
realistic situation as well, because you'd work on it with actually, you know, a partner to hit the ball across the net with and work on your serve, work on your forehand, backhand, all those things. Whereas in a life situation, then you wouldn't have this person follow you around everywhere, would you? Doing
No,
everything. So this is
no,
your life. You're on a date. You want to get better at being on a date. I'm going to give you some real good advice about how to do it. You know, you don't
yeah,
follow them on that
you're
date
an
though and become the
Bergerac
gooseberry.
approach.
Yeah, you don't do that, do you? So
Well, yeah, there is a version of coaching that I've come across in schools where the coachee will have a earpiece in and they'll have a
yeah, yeah, yeah.
coach communicating with them, saying do this, do that throughout the lesson, which always strikes me as having problems.
Yes, and also, is that person in the classroom or are they watching from a video somewhere else? Or
It depends on the setup, I suppose, but yeah.
you would think that the students would get slightly suspicious that something odd was going on. What's
I
that in
could
your ear, sir?
Yeah. Are you listening to music?
Yeah, yeah,
How come
yeah, yeah,
we're not allowed our headphones?
yeah. That's right. Yeah, you can imagine it all happening. So I think that coaches in a classroom situation, we'd have that problem. They're not able to see us all the time teaching, and therefore th- they're not being able to react to some of the things that perhaps needed working on.
Hmm.
And so when they
Yeah,
do choose to turn up, you might do your best lesson or something like that because you're being watched.
you might, which kind of really speaks to sort of why coaching is so popular right now. Why are we spending so much money on it? Why are schools prioritizing it? What's the deal? What's the appeal?
It's improvement, isn't it? They're trying forever to improve teachers.
Yeah. So what are they trying to improve particularly?
Well, that's the issue, isn't it? Because I suppose every teacher is different, but in the end, it's the bottom line, I suppose, is results.
Right. Outcomes. Yeah. Okay. So we can. So it's interesting. So there's a lot of research that I think has added to the appeal of coaching. So in one meta-analysis by Kraft, Blazer, and Hogan, professional development, which incorporates coaching, has a greater impact on teaching than professional development that doesn't include it. I can give you some average effect sizes if you're interested, Martin.
I'm really interested. Tell me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So the improvement on instructional quality is plus 0.449 of a standard deviation.
Right. What's that mean to the layperson?
I don't know. How are they? How are they measuring that? What does it even mean? So there's also it also tells us that meta-analysis tells us that there's an effect on student achievement, and that includes improves by 0.18 of a standard deviation, and that means something, doesn't it? Because that's looking at test scores and saying, that when we compare test scores of students who aren't being taught by a teacher who's being coached, we can see that on average the scores aren't as good. So that has some inherent meaning, whether you think that's a great way of doing things or not. But how can we say instructional equality is improving by 0.49 of a standard deviation if student achievement is only going up by 0.18? That seems a bit fishy, doesn't it?
Right. So what evidence is there, therefore, that coaching is a good thing?
Well,
If we can't get it from scores
yeah.
on the doors, what do we know from then? How can
Well,
we say it's a good thing? Why are people saying it's a good thing then?
right. Okay. So basically, I think it comes from the idea that we spend a lot of money on CPD and it has almost no impact
Right. How do we know that?
because test scores don't go up, exam results don't improve, there is no measurable improvement. So that's that people might like it or dislike it, but if it doesn't improve results, what's the point?
Right. That's at a school level
Yeah,
or a national level even. But
yeah,
what about individual teacher level? Is there something there that we can
yeah.
see?
What
Is
is
there
that
any evidence about that?
about their professional satisfaction?
No, no, no. But about teachers getting better as teachers.
Yeah, well, I guess the response to that is to say, if a teacher is getting better at teaching and that improvement has no discernible effect on their students' outcomes, what does it mean to get better at teaching?
Hmm,
How do we know they're better? Do we just like what they're doing more? I had the experience years ago working when I was for a first head of English in a school, and I had a particular sort of set of preferences about what I thought good English teaching looked like, and there was a member of my department who didn't do the things that I thought were right,
right.
and and I'd sort of go and watch her teach and think, oh, that's not really the thing, and rather inconveniently, her results were better than anyone else's in the department.
That's it, isn't it? I mean, there could be
Yeah,
reasons for that, of course, but
there could be reasons for that. I mean, but it does sort of suggest that our preferences are by the by.
right. Going back to the sports analogy here,
Yeah,
when you're
I
watching
mean, it's easy
someone
to think what improvement
hit a
means.
football or whatever, or
Yeah,
hit a tennis ball or whatever it happens to be,
yeah,
in the end, are they winning? Are they successful? Is quite a
yeah,
useful measure. And it's
yeah.
something you can
It's
actually
binary.
see, oh, there, when they shoot like that, it goes in the goal, or
Yeah,
it goes in the basket, it goes
or
over
goes
the
in the
net,
net. Yeah,
it does those things. So tangible,
yeah,
it works.
yeah,
And it works with something immediate to an endpoint.
yeah,
Now, in teaching,
yeah.
famously, you can't see learning, we've been told for ages. So,
I I'm
are we
certainly with
actually coaching some sort of performative aspects of teaching rather than things that necessarily work or don't work? How do we know?
Yeah, absolutely. So the only bits of the process that we get to observe are the performative aspects. We get to see what teachers do. We get to see what students do in response, and from that we make inferences about what students are learning and whether teachers are improving, whatever that means. So it's all very, very inferential. It doesn't have the tangibility of coaching in a field like sports, as you pointed out. But there might be other outcomes we could look at, as well as teacher actions improving student results, because maybe there's a case for saying that if teachers like being coached and they enjoy the feeling of getting better, that maybe we could improve teacher retention.
Right. And there's also, because it's like the loneliness of the long distance runner. Sometimes teaching is a lonely task.
Very
I know you're surrounded by other
children.
people, but
Yeah,
actually you're not surrounded by other teachers. You're very much on your own quite a lot of the time. So it's quite nice to have someone come in and give you some support, perhaps, and you they're noticing me. They're actually watching what I do, and they're adults.
yeah.
Thank you. You know. So what are sorts of different approaches are there to coaching in schools or other
Well,
institutions?
okay. I think there's two sort of main dividers, and I think they can be typified by sort of thinking about the people maybe most associated with them. So on the one side, we've got what I will refer to as the Bambrick Santoyo approach, that detailed in his books, things like Leverage Leadership, which is very structured, very data driven, results
Right.
focused, very clear goals, very clear feedback loops, very much about the coach directing the process and saying, here's what I want you to do, here's what I'm going to come and check. And on the other side, we've got an approach that is typified perhaps by Jim Knight, who's a very prominent figure in the coaching world. And his approach to coaching is much more collaborative, much more relationship based, teacher centered. Coaches are seen as partners rather than as authority figures. So it'll be much more, what do you want to get better at? And sort of coaching conversations might be much more along the lines of, what did you notice? What did you think? Rather than directive.
Right. So the latter sounds more progressive, drawing it out,
Yeah.
and
And
the other one sort of more traditional, putting it in. You've got to be more like this. This is your target. You've got to do it. Am I being ridiculous, or is that something along the lines of the
yeah,
truth there?
maybe. I think in here in the UK, I think the that collaborative teacher centered model is much more popular.
Right.
It's much more the approach that's being pushed out with some of the companies which are selling coaching to schools at the moment. We haven't
You
really
sell?
talked
How could you sell that out of interest? How would you sell teachers working together
much.
on their own practice?
Well, you might very well ask that. So what you do is you sell training, you sell resources to improve that process. But there's a lot of money to be made. That there are. Just this week, I was looking at some adverts out for one particular coaching company, and advertising roles. Of £70,000 per year for various coaching roles. It's big business.
Gosh.
Yeah, there's a lot of money at stake, and so if we've got this set against the backdrop that we spend money on CPD, it doesn't seem to have any impact. But instructional coaching is different. Instructional coaching has impact. It will make things better, unlike bog standard gather everyone in a hall and speak to them type approaches,
Yeah, I
which
mean, the Baker Day, as they used to be called, the inset day approach. One talk for an hour or 2 hours or whatever it is, change everything.
yeah,
By the next day, it's forgotten. If
yeah,
you unless it's part of something that is changing and really
yeah,
focusing on for a long time, you can't change
yeah.
anything in a
No,
day.
it's quite persuasive. It's a good narrative.
Hmm.
That if you work with individuals, if it's personalised and tailored to their individual needs, why wouldn't it be better?
It's
But
funny
you
when I
asked me,
was back in the 90s, this going
yeah,
back to the old days, the last century,
very much so.
and we had someone come in to talk about how to coach each other, and they demonstrated it through this model. They put a teacher, on a chair, and behind them they put a waste paper bin about
Okay,
10 yards, 15 yards behind them, and that gave them a tennis ball,
right,
and they had to throw it over their shoulder, and it had to land in the bin, or that was the idea, was to make it land in the bin.
yeah,
And then they had another teacher who would gives them advice on how to get nearer to the bin, basically, and get it into the bin. So
Yeah.
not so far to the left, to the right a bit, or whatever. Until eventually this ball would land in the bin.
Right.
Until someone pointed out, well, why can't you just face the bin in the
Yeah.
first place?
Well, that would have been my coaching advice. Turn round. Stand nearer the bin. Um, yeah. Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I
Well,
know what he's getting at. He's getting at trying to get this style of your
yeah.
your Socratic dialogue, you know, gently, but it seemed to have so much of an obvious aim
Yeah.
to it that actually it's not. It doesn't pertain to coaching in the classroom at all, unless you're trying to get a specific aim in the classroom, which is
Yeah.
how to do my register, how to get a queue at the door,
Yeah.
um, specific things like that, rather than a general how to make them learn better or whatever.
Right. And so, this Bambrick Santoyo model, which seems to me to be closer to the sports coaching paradigm, where the coach is saying, right, okay, this is what we need to work on. I'm gonna give you specific instructions on how to get better at this stuff. Um, it does come with weaknesses. I can very much imagine that you could feel micromanaged. It might be easy to miss the human as, relational aspects of teaching, and that the person being coached might not enjoy it. So it could in the wrong hands result in enforcing compliance.
Hmm. It's
There's a sort of side point here as well, Martin. In the US, where this is like a more common model, um, schools employ coaches who don't also teach; they just coach.
Have they ever taught?
Yes, yes. So there'll be
Okay.
ex-teachers. I was recently working at a school in Beijing and working with a cohort of staff at that school who were the coaches. They were the instructional coaches, and they don't do any teaching. They just work with other teachers.
Right. I mean,
It's
to some
interesting.
extent,
A lot of opportunity cost.
people working in a school who know the kids,
Mm.
who know the ways of that school, going into classrooms quite regularly, working with teachers, perhaps has certain cachet.
Yeah,
It certainly works in some ways. I've done work with schools working on teacher voice, how to
yeah,
project and how to use your voice. And
yes.
again, that's quite specific, but you can certainly work on general things like volume and making sure you're heard, and voice protection and projection, basically something quite limited.
Mm.
And you can get something going, but you don't know if it's kept going 3 weeks, 4 weeks down the line. This is the problem, and you're not there all the time, but you can certainly do some input. I wouldn't You could call it coaching, and could call it teaching.
Could do, could do. Yeah, yeah. So,
What about people who think coaching is not so good? Not it's slightly
well,
doesn't work in education settings. Is there anyone
well,
out there?
well, there are, I think there will be, of course. I think it's more the case that this is something that's very hard to scale. That there is this research which shows that instructional coaching does appear to be a good bet in terms of CPD, that it seems to have more effect than other ways of doing professional development, but it's really difficult to get right at scale. So if you're doing it in one setting where you know all the moving parts, maybe you can make it work. But when you go into another place and say, right, this is what you need to do in order to make coaching work here, then there's much more drift.
Does it work across subjects as well? I mean, it tends to be quite generic, does it?
I think it does, and I think that's a potential problem, is that everybody's working on pedagogy and not curriculum. Can you just extemporize for a moment? I've just got to do a small job. Hang on a second.
Okay. I don't. This is very interesting. What a small job might be, of course. So he's going off to do his small job. the mind does boggle, really. Um, we've talked a bit about power dynamics in coaching, and we're also looking at how that might work. Now, David gave one of his ideas there about somebody coming along and having to work with people because they're not doing their job so well, and the head teacher trying to perhaps move them to the side. And you can see that that wouldn't be a great way of working with people, and you'd be very suspicious of someone coming in and having to work with you in those situations. So in if we are working this clattering, I love the clattering and breaking of glass that's going on in the background in David's place there. So if you're using coaching in that way, does it work so well? Or as we said earlier, if the teacher is welcoming and it's working in that way, it's not a threat, then perhaps it can be that the teacher themselves wants to work on these things. And so when I talked about working on voice, if the teacher wants to work on voice, if the teacher thinks there's an issue with his or her use of voice in the classroom, then to approach me would be better than having someone say, your voice work isn't very good, you must work in this way, here's someone to help you, because that can be seen as more of a threat. David has now returned. God knows what he did. I like the clattering and breaking of glass or whatever going on
Yeah,
in
I
the
just had to
background there.
smash something, Martin. I was full of rage.
Tell us
Apologies.
a bit about, I think it's Rob Coe's approach to coaching, or co-coaching, or
Yeah,
co-co-coaching, or whatever else we
co-coaching.
want to call it.
Yeah, yeah, I should Coco. Yeah, so interestingly, Rob Coe put together a year or so now a post in which he said evidence-based education, the outfit that he now works for, why aren't that they're not doing instructional coaching? Everyone else is doing instructional coaching, but they're not. And he essentially is arguing that the evidence, whilst there's all sorts of good evidence why it might be a good thing, when it comes to implementation and scaling, the evidence isn't really there, and the costs of coaching in terms of having skilled coaches and proper resources means that it becomes a bit unaffordable for schools. We've already talked about how much money is being made for
Mm.
this by coaching companies. And that's obviously money that can't be spent on other things that schools might want to
Well,
spend.
like a teacher. I mean, £70,000,
Teacher.
that's potentially two young teachers, isn't it?
Well, it absolutely is. So yeah. So his model, what they're suggesting, what they do is to do like a coaching light version where within schools we've got um, personal learning groups. What was it that Dylan William used to call these sort of triads? And
Oh yeah, there's the whole triad thing.
yeah,
That is
yeah,
quite
it's
interesting.
much
David Weston did some work on that as well.
right. So it's much more. It's much more that kind of thing, where where you're doing it for yourself. You're accepting the fact that you don't have a real expert going in and dedicating time, but you do have people working
Well,
together. You were
y-
saying something about the before I had to rush off about whether it was too generic.
yeah, I was just whether, you know, I mean, you're talking there about experts.
Mm,
If you have, this is where also the fact that so many older teachers are no longer teaching can be a bit of an issue, perhaps, that
yeah,
you take away that level of expertise in a subject area. I have taught in this school for the last 5 years or whatever, or 20 years or 25 years, whatever it happens to be, in this subject, and this is the way that I found works really, really well. To have
yeah.
that dialogue also with new ideas coming in, with new teachers, I've learned in different ways, perhaps about different things, and having that dialogue over the years is quite an interesting way of doing it. Is that coaching? Just advice, dropping into each other's lessons? Is that coaching?
Well, at the level it is, yeah, it absolutely it is, and I think the vibe within a particular schools. I know you think I know you like the idea of open classrooms, don't you?
Yeah, open classrooms, but it's it doesn't have to be open, but the idea of open door, that you can
Yeah,
go through the door anytime and sit in someone else's class and watch them teach. So they're modeling really, and
yeah,
you're
absolutely.
picking up things that you want to pick. Oh, that was really great when you did that.
Yeah, so I remember, I think in my maybe second or third year of teaching, and I'd moved school, and I taught next to this old fella called Derek Adams, who'd been teaching, an English teacher at this school for decades. He taught everyone's mum and probably taught their nan as well. And I was fortunate enough to have free lessons at times when he was teaching, and he was really happy for me to go and just sit at the back of his classroom and sort of take a pile of marking in and just sort of soak up the vibe. And I learned so much from
Mm,
him. Just the way he taught things, the analogies that he used, and the breadth of his experience. He'd seen it all before many times, and very few things the kids did surprised him, so he was ready for all of their their questions and mistakes, and it was a great apprenticeship,
yeah.
being able to do that. I really valued it, and I saw him putting it into action, and that was the
Yes.
key bit. So one of the things that one of the things that, one of my observations is that there's always been, or certainly not always, but over the the last 10, 15 years, there's a lot of lesson observation, whether it's drop-ins or learning walks. There's a lot of this stuff goes on in schools, and it seems to me that the people who observe the most teach least.
Mm,
But the person that benefits most from lesson observation is the observer, not the observee. And so, what I think one of the potential difficulties with coaching is that we're going in, we're watching teachers teach. The coach is getting loads of benefit from that, but is the person being coached? And one of the things that I do a lot of when I visit schools, work with schools, is I I model a lesson. I'll go into a classroom and I'll teach that teacher's students, and so they can see what I'm asking them to think about, what I'm asking them to do with their kids, and that seems to make quite a bit of difference to their understanding of like what they think is
yeah.
worthwhile.
It's also the conversations that happen afterwards when you watch your colleague or someone
Yeah,
goes in, you're watching a demonstration lesson or whatever, or even a video of a lesson. The conversation that you can have with each other
yeah,
or with the person you've just observed is quite interesting. Why do you do that? How do you
mm,
do that? How did you
yeah,
arrive at that? Those sorts of questions which are really interesting. Does it always work? Those
yeah,
has it
yeah, yeah.
always,
No,
did you
and
always do that?
I think one of the other issues with sort of watching another teacher is, I was sort of talking about this earlier, sort of, having preferences, having sort of like, this is what I like. And the tendency, I think, is to, when you see a teacher doing something that isn't the thing you like, when they do something that you feel a bit more disapproving of for whatever reason, uh, we just snap into judgment mode. And I think it's really important to ask yourself, if not them, I wonder why they're doing that. And having those kinds of questions and conversations can be really useful. And if coaching is about a two-way process where the hierarchy is removed and both sides are learning from the process. So I've watched you teach and I can say, Martin, why did you do that? I don't
Mm,
really understand why you did that. And you can then explain to me and I can then make a decision of, oh, okay, yeah, I've learned. Whereas when I'm your coach, you know, it's kind of one way, isn't it?
yeah, and it's the idea that you're better than me, which is,
Right.
or you have the answer and there's something secret that I'm not doing. that's
Maybe.
that's kept there. I mean, which again, if you look at sports coaching, it isn't necessarily like that. Because a good sports coach is trying to draw something out that they're not necessarily sure what it is because it's within that person somewhere along the line. They might hold the racket slightly differently, so change it
Uh,
slightly, but actually then that becomes more awkward. So they're adjusting to the person all the time. But if you're going in with a set idea, this is what good teaching looks like, this is what this teacher isn't doing, therefore this teacher needs to do this. That isn't really coaching, is it?
it's interesting. Some years ago, I was employed by Saracens Rugby Club, believe it or not, and uh, just for the avoidance of doubt, I know nothing about rugby. I am a rugby luddite, and I told that I went in sort of explaining that this was the case, and they that's fine. We just want you to talk us through sort of various ideas about how we might do things. So I spent a day with the coaching team at Saracens, and one of the questions that they had for me, it was something along the lines of, how come like our team players really, really improve through coaching, but like the kind of the third team players or the ones that play less regularly, don't seem to make as much improvement. And I thought that was a really interesting question. That because it was, to me, it seemed like entirely obvious why that would be the case, um, but they didn't seem to have an answer to it. So I was saying, well, one, the the way you treat the first team, the fact that they get so many more games is going to make a lot of impact on the approach that that of everything that's going on for them. It sort of seems to make complete sense why they'd be getting better and better as a result of the quality of the experience that they're having.
And is there a way out of bottom set as well if you're in the third team?
Yeah, yeah, it was a little bit like that. The third team were very much sort of bottom set in the eyes of the coaches. Obviously, they're these bottom set third team rugby players are all very good rugby players. Otherwise, Saracens wouldn't be wasting their time with them. But the elites, the people who are the very best at rugby, turns out they're quite a lot better than the people who are just quite good at rugby.
Mm, yeah. So what does good coaching look like, or is it just not a thing?
Yeah, is it a bit shit? Is that what you're asking?
No, I wouldn't use that sort of language, as you
I
know.
don't know. I think that when you're working with somebody who's a novice, if you're working with an ECT or a trainee, I think coaching can be much more effective in that it makes a lot of sense to be directive and tell them things that they just don't know and they haven't encountered before. I remember working with a trainee years ago where he had obviously been in my classroom watching me teach, and he'd noticed that I didn't always teach from the front of where the whiteboard was. That sometimes I'd occupy a different position in the classroom, and he'd obviously thought to himself, "Okay, that I'm going to do that." So I watched him teach my class, and he was all over the place. He was over there. He was over. The kids were getting whiplash, and and he'd copied the visible structure without having any idea of the underlying reasoning, sort of cargo cult teaching. And I explained to him, that the reason I went over there wasn't to go over there. It was because I was, observing, standing next to a particular kind of student and sort of making sure that they didn't go off task and this kind of thing. And I taped in masking tape an X at the front of the room because he was really bad at just staying at the front and teaching from the front. And I said, you've got to master the X. Once you can teach from there, then I'll let you try going elsewhere in the room. But do this first. And you can, that kind of thing can be quite useful with a relative novice. But are there diminishing marginal returns if everybody's being coached? Um,
But this is where it comes. The importance is, how do we know if the coaching is any good? I mean,
how
if
do
everyone's
we?
being coached, who's being coached the best?
Yeah.
I mean, is there
And
other
and are
ways of
the
doing it better
coaches
than
being
others?
coached and in coaching, and who's coaching the coaches that are coaching, and yeah.
Well, if I'm spending 70 grand, let's say, or 50 grand, or whatever it happens to be, how do I know I'm getting my money's worth?
Well, I don't think you do, Martin. It's all about the vibes. I heard recently of an academy trust that had been paying to use one of these large scale coaching models sold into them, that where the perception was that the schools that were using this product were getting worse.
Were they? I mean, was that due to coaching, or is it just a
Who
feel,
who can
or
say? I mean, there are so many moving parts that I think that if you're saying we're going to spend this money on coaching and we're expecting to see a return on our investment of X in this length of time, I think you're on a hiding to nothing. There's no real way that you can tell that
but
story in a
what
way
are they
which
selling?
makes
I mean,
you.
are they selling coaching? You said pedagogy. Is it, but all pedagogy, you're going to be better at pedagogy. You're going to be better at whatever that is. I mean, again, with
Yeah,
clarity, these things. I mean, when I go in and do coaching on voice, there's
yeah,
clear,
yeah,
tangible goals that you can
yeah,
set. They're going to be better at doing whatever, and it's a very narrow field,
yeah.
But
No,
it can
exactly. If
add
I go,
to better
sorry.
teaching at some point. But when you buy coaching,
Mm.
what are you buying?
Well, you're buying training, so you get trained in a particular model of coaching. So you go to courses and you have access to online webinars and that sort of thing. I think also there are companies out there who sell libraries of clips of class filmed in classrooms.
So model a kind of modeling thing going on there.
Kind of modeling, yeah, well, yeah, definitely modeling, and that can be really useful to look at specific um, teachers making particular moves and students responding to those moves, and watching that with colleagues and saying, what do we think about that? Did that seem to have the effect that we hoped or we thought it might? Those sorts of things can be, that you're paying for that.
There's something you put down in the program notes. We have program notes, folks,
Believe it
and
or not.
you sort of said in capital letters here, it should not be prescriptive. Not prescriptive. I mean, good coaching is not prescriptive. So, could you explain that?
Yeah. Well, that's what the evidence would appear to say. That Sam Sims, amongst others, who's done much to sort of popularise and point to the research on instructional coaching, is clear that where you've got prescriptive coaching, you can't really count on it having the same kind of impact as the more collaborative, conversational approach. That if you force people to be coached, right, Martin, you're not doing a very good job. I'm going to come along and coach you so that you're going to be better, and you're like, I don't want that. That doesn't seem to be what responds to the evidence about how coaching improves things.
So, to some extent, I can play lip service to it because someone's there. I say, "Oh, that's a good idea," and when you go, I close
I
the
think,
classroom door and I
yeah,
carry on just as before.
I think so. I think you've got to want to get better. You've got to be invested in the process and to believe that you've got to buy into it and believe that coaching is going to make you better, and making and being better is something that you're seeking for yourself.
Right, and that's quite difficult to achieve in a school setting.
Well, maybe I think that that there's a quite a well-known line that Dylan Williams famous for saying that all teachers can improve not because they're not very good, but because they can. We can all get better. And I remember once hearing Dylan say, I don't know how serious he was, but saying we should ask teachers if they think they can improve. And if they say yes, we should work with them. And if they say no, we should fire them. Um,
Oh,
I know.
difficult that.
So,
I think that'll go.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so this idea that being a teacher should mean that you want to improve, that you're constantly trying to get better and better and better at your craft, and maybe that isn't an ideal. Maybe that is what being a great teacher is about. But is it a reasonable expectation? That teaching is, after all, a job, and the why should it be treated as something like elite sport where you have a coach and you're trying to get better and better and better at? Can't you just do your job? And
Isn't
that's a
it? Isn't all coaching as well? I mean, this is where it becomes part of what we've been talking about here. It's about pedagogy. But what happens if a teacher improves to a certain level? They get promoted out of the classroom.
yeah. Well, that does seem to be the
So there's a
case.
strange thing. You want them to get better, so they get out of the classroom. They get out of the classroom and then no longer receive any coaching about being a line manager, no coaching about being a head teacher, or is there such
Well,
things?
the problem, and there almost certainly is, but it's probably not good enough. I think we're not we're not nearly good enough at sort of preparing people for how to run schools, and the expectation that they're just going to be able to do it is naive, to say the least. I think that there are trusts, multi academy trusts, that do this better or worse than others, and that really look after and invest new head teachers, and others where they're pretty much left to their own devices and then blamed if things don't work. As always, there's a mixed economy here. But you're really right to say that the current environment rewards people for being successful teachers by telling them they no longer have to teach, that you've earned your way out of it. You can now be a lead practitioner, you can now be a coach, you can now work for the central team at a multi academy trust. And we were talking some weeks ago about the difference between what that's like now and what it used to be like in the old local authority days,
Mm.
where you were very much in favour of that, weren't you? The
Very
old
much in
local
favour of
authority
what?
model.
Old teachers
Old
going
teachers.
round schools.
No, the local authority model of school improvement.
Yeah, I was saying my experience of it,
Yeah, you
it
had a very
was
positive
it
experience.
had a positive input. But these people were also teachers. They were teaching, in lots of schools as well at the time. They weren't divorced from teaching.
Yeah,
So they would go round schools and teach certain lessons and things
yeah,
like that, particularly in primary where there wasn't the expertise. And I'm talking particularly my subject, which is drama, which is not necessarily in every school, you see.
absolutely. Yeah, no, of course. So yeah, there are systemic problems with the idea that we take coaches out of the classroom to be coaches, and uh, there are potential advantages to the model that Rob Coe's endorsing, of having just teachers working together to improve their practice, and not having a hierarchical approach. I watch you, you watch me back. If I watch you badly, you can get your revenge, sort of thing. Um, but the key to whatever model you're choosing, the key to making it successful, I think, essentially relies on trust.
Hmm.
You've got to trust the person you're working with, and that's got to be mutual. So if I'm working with you and I'm coaching you and you're coaching me back, I've got to trust that you know what you're on about, and that you have something of value to offer, and I've got to trust that that there aren't going to be unpleasant repercussions if I
Hmm.
don't do things correctly. All of that sort of stuff's got to be really, really important, I
And
think.
then we get the thing about doing things correctly or doing things successfully, which is slightly different, perhaps.
Yeah,
Correctly has a one, you can only do it this way. Successfully means you can do it in slightly different ways, but if it works, it works.
yeah, and I think that there are, one of those phrases that you hear a lot in schools, is non-negotiables. I'm
Hmm.
sure you've come across non-negotiables, Martin. And I think there are some things where, obviously it makes sense to have non-negotiables. Like, we shouldn't be negotiating like whether teachers should turn up for lessons or not. That's non-negotiable.
Yeah.
You should be there. And there are other things which are statutory. You can't negotiate whether or not you want to hit kids. It's
Hmm.
against the law, i.e., non-negotiable. But where I think, where I'd always want to draw the line and where I'd always think it's worth negotiating is on matters pedagogical and curricular. If I set myself up as an expert and say this is how everybody should do something, am I always right? Is it right in this setting, in this subject, in this phase, with that child? And at a certain level, you're right. It's got to be open to the idea that other people know at least as much as I do about teaching their subject in their classroom with their students, and that for coaching to be successful, maybe it has to recognise that.
Blimey, you see what happens here? David does nuance.
David does nuance. That's
Can't have
that's my
that.
new book, ladies and listeners.
So, as a sort of endpoint, coaching,
It's-
good or
it-
bad?
maybe the goal here is, that maybe we should think about endpoints. That where's all this coaching getting to, and that for individual teachers, we were talking about the roots in Oxford about a coach carrying a student through an exam, and the a coach in an educational capacity may be carrying a novice teacher through that novice stage. But ultimately, should should we end up at self coaching? Should the goal be for us to coach ourselves?
I mean, people say that the self-improving teacher, etc., etc., but it's always good to have that possibility of someone coming into your
Yeah.
room to help that process, perhaps.
Yeah, but beyond that novice level, you've got to know what it is perhaps you want to get better at. And so I can sort of think, oh, Martin's an expert in voice projection. Martin, come and help me with my
Yeah,
voice.
yeah,
That's much more like Djokovic working with Andy Murray, help me with my backhand, isn't it?
yeah, yeah,
And that kind of model where I, as an experienced teacher, are opting in to something that I'm reflecting on in my
yeah, yeah.
practice. I could be better at this. That's the person that I'd like to work with. Let's see if I can improve. That's maybe quite a different model.
Well, perhaps our listeners or viewers or whoever has got some experience of coaching and either being a coach or being coached well or badly, and
Yeah,
perhaps they
we
could
love to
just
hear from people who are
put in the
coaches,
notes below.
people who've been coached, people who've been coached,
Yeah.
um, any of that. So yeah, do get in touch and let us know if you found this to be particularly nuanced. Always love to hear that. Martin, it'd be nice for you to be nuanced this week.
I'll try and be nuanced next week.
Next week, okay.
Is that
Next
okay?
week. Yeah, it's perfect.
Anyway, thank you for watching, for listening. Please like and subscribe and do follow or whatever it happens to be on your particular network you're viewing us or listening to us through. Otherwise, thank you and see you
Thank you for
next
wasting
time.
your time with us yet again. Martin, can you put the graphic up there?
Oh gosh, you're really asking for everything now.
Oh
That
no,
means I've
sorry,
got to
I really am.
look there.
Those of
And
you
there
that
you go.
beautiful. If you're listening to this on the podcast, you don't know what you're missing.
There we go. Anyway,
Literally.
take care, everyone. Thank you for watching.
Bye.
Bye bye.